My director looked up from her laptop, tilted her head, and asked, "Why is there a complaint filed against your corporate account? Someone ran $14,000 through it last month." Before I could answer, my husband walked into the conference room right behind her and said, completely calm, like he was commenting on traffic, "Oh, that was me. I set her up as a signer on my brother's business account. Easier for invoicing." My director set her pen down very slowly. And what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to September. To a Tuesday morning when I was standing in our kitchen in Portland, pouring the last of the coffee into my travel mug because my husband had already taken the good thermos, the one I bought. Small thing, I noticed it the way you notice a paper cut. Briefly, then you tell yourself it doesn't matter. My husband, who I'll just call my husband throughout this because even saying his name now feels strange, had come downstairs already dressed in his blazer. He worked in the finance department at the same company where I was a senior project manager, Cascade Solutions Group, a mid-size consulting firm in Portland with about 300 employees. We'd both been there for years. He'd been there when I was hired, actually. That should have been a warning sign. I didn't see it that way at the time. "Hey," he said, not looking up from his phone. "You know how I've been helping Donnie get his landscaping business off the ground?" Donnie was his younger brother, 29, charming, perpetually in the middle of some new venture that never quite launched. "Sure," I said. "He needs to process a few client payments. Nothing major. I was thinking we could link your corporate purchasing account to his business account temporarily, just for a month or two while he gets his merchant processing sorted out." I stopped. My corporate purchasing account was a company-issued card tied directly to my employee profile. I used it for vendor contracts, software licenses, client travel. The spending limit was $20,000. Every transaction was reviewed by our director, Claudette. Not the Claudette in the names file, but my Claudette, my actual boss, during the quarterly audit. "That's a company account," I said carefully. "I'm personally liable for every transaction on it." My husband finally looked up, that specific look, the one that made my stomach do something uncomfortable. Patient, almost pitying. "It's not a big deal. 2 transactions, maybe 3. He just needs a bridge while his Square account clears verification. You really can't help family with something this small?" And there it was, the word family, dropped like a coin on a table. We'd bought our house 4 years ago. His parents had co-signed the mortgage with us because my credit had taken a hit after a medical situation in my late 20s. They'd been generous. My mother-in-law brought that up approximately once every 6 weeks, usually when I was about to say no to something. It had become less of a memory and more of a leash. "Let me think about it," I said. He smiled. I already told him yes. That was how it always went. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Donnie was trying, that helping family was a good thing, that being suspicious of my own husband was the problem here, not the request itself. I had gotten very good at talking myself out of my own instincts. 3 weeks later, I got a notification on my company portal. A transaction alert. $14,216. Charged to my corporate account over 11 separate transactions. Software subscriptions, equipment, a payment to a vendor I'd never heard of, all routed through a processing system I didn't recognize. I called my husband immediately. "What is this?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Donnie needed to move a little faster than expected. He had a big commercial contract come through and needed to front some materials. He's going to pay it back. $14,000, I said. "It's not like you're paying it out of pocket. It's a company account. I am personally liable for every dollar on that account." "You're being dramatic." His voice had shifted into that particular register, the one that made me feel like I was watching myself from outside my body. "It's temporary. Donnie has a contract. He'll reimburse by end of the month. Why do you always make everything so hard?" I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work for 11 minutes, trying to decide what to do. My whole career, 7 years at this company, 2 promotions, a reputation I'd spent every early morning and late evening building. All of it sitting on top of a financial violation I hadn't authorized. I should have reported it immediately. I know that now. Instead, I went upstairs and tried to get through the day. I moved one meeting, rewrote a client brief, ate a granola bar at my desk, and quietly started researching whether I could dispute company account charges without triggering an automatic HR review. I couldn't. Claudette called me in at the end of the week. Her office had a glass wall that faced the open floor, and I could see my colleagues at their desks as she closed the door behind me. My husband was somewhere on the 4th floor, finance. I wondered if he'd seen my name on some report, if he already knew. She sat across from me, not behind her desk. That was unusual. She had a printed copy of my account activity in her hands. "I need to understand what happened here," she said. Her voice was neutral. The kind of neutral that means someone is being very careful. "I know it looks wrong," I started. "It doesn't look wrong, it is wrong." She set the paper on the table between us. $14,000 run through a company purchasing account to a business entity that has no relationship with Cascade Solutions. These were not authorized expenditures. You know that. I did know that. I had known it for 9 days while I waited for Donnie to pay it back, while I checked my account every morning hoping the balance would change, while I told myself it would be fine. My husband told me it was a bridge, 2 or 3 small transactions. It became more than that without my knowledge. Claudette looked at me for a long moment, then she said something I hadn't expected. "Is this the first time something like this has happened?" The question sat in the air between us. I felt it land somewhere in my chest. I thought about the rewards credit card my husband had opened in my name 18 months ago without telling me. I'd found out when the statement arrived. $3,000 in charges for golf equipment and a weekend trip to Bend that I had not been on. When I confronted him, he said he thought I knew, that I must have signed something and forgotten. He said it so confidently that for 3 days I actually wondered if I had. I thought about the contract work I'd taken on the side 2 years ago, small consulting projects to build savings, and how my husband had helped me manage the invoices, how 2 clients had told me they'd already paid when I followed up, but the deposits had never reached my account. When I asked about it, he said there must have been a processing error and that he'd look into it. He never did. I eventually let it go. I thought about the time he told my former manager that I was going through something personal and probably wasn't ready for the director track yet. I'd found out from a colleague who'd overheard it in a hallway. When I brought it up, he said he was worried about my stress levels, that he was trying to protect me. I looked at Claudette. "No," I said quietly. "It's not the first time." She leaned forward slightly. "I need you to tell me everything." I told her. It came out in fragments at first, then in a longer, steadier stream. The credit card, the missing consulting payments, the comment to my former manager, the account. She wrote things down. She didn't interrupt. She asked clarifying questions in a voice that was even and careful, and somehow made me feel like I wasn't crazy for the first time in years. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What you're describing is a pattern, not a series of accidents. And some of it intersects directly with company policy and potentially with criminal statutes around unauthorized use of a financial instrument." She paused. "I want to be honest with you. There's going to be an investigation. That process will be uncomfortable. But I also want you to know, and I should have seen this sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't. You are one of the best project managers in this organization. Your work speaks for itself. That doesn't disappear because someone in your life took advantage of your access and your trust." I held it together until I got to the hallway. Then I stood facing a blank wall near the emergency exit for about 2 minutes, just breathing. My husband texted me while I was still in the building. "Hey, can you pick up dinner? Long day." Like nothing, like absolutely nothing. I didn't go home that night. I drove to my friend Reese's apartment in Northeast Portland instead. She'd been my closest friend since our mid-20s, and the moment she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside to let me in and put the kettle on. I sat on her couch and told her everything. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said when I finished. Her voice was flat with a kind of controlled fury I recognized from the years I'd known her. "He knew the limit on that account. He works in finance. He said Donnie would pay it back." Reese said, "Has Donnie paid anything back?" I already knew the answer. Reese let me stay. I slept in her second bedroom and lay awake most of the night looking at the ceiling, trying to account for the past 4 years of my marriage. Not the dramatic moments. Those were easy to identify. It was the small ones I kept returning to. The Saturday morning I suggested we try the farmer's market, and he said we always went on Saturdays. And then I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd suggested where we went on a Saturday. The work conference I'd been invited to present at in Chicago that he'd said seemed like a lot of stress for not much career benefit, and I'd declined. The raise I'd negotiated and immediately told him about, and how he'd responded by pointing out that we should really be thinking about his parents' retirement situation. Each thing alone was nothing. Together, they were a map I hadn't known I was reading. The HR investigation started officially the following Monday. My husband was placed on administrative leave while it proceeded. His access to company systems was suspended. I know he found out because I got 17 text messages over the course of that day, ranging from confused to hurt to angry to the specific cold register that I had learned over 4 years meant something more serious was coming. I stayed at Reese's. On Wednesday, a woman named Patricia, a woman I'll call my husband's former colleague, reached out to me on LinkedIn. Her message was brief. She said she'd worked in finance at another firm where my husband had worked before Cascade, and that she'd heard through a mutual contact that there was an investigation. She said she had information that might be relevant. She asked if I was willing to talk. I forwarded the message to our company's legal team and to my personal attorney, a sharp, precise woman named Victoria Ng, who I'd found through a referral from Reese. Victoria checked the woman out. She was legitimate. She'd worked in finance at a firm in Seattle for 3 years before resigning. No connection to my husband's family. We met at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, a public place, a Tuesday afternoon. She was in her mid-30s, careful in her movements, with the look of someone who had rehearsed what she wanted to say. "He did the same kind of thing where I worked," she said. "Not with personal accounts, with departmental budgets. He'd find someone in a role that came with discretionary spending, build a relationship with them, then start making small requests. A purchase here, a reimbursement there. Nothing that triggered immediate review. By the time it added up, he was long gone, and the other person was holding the liability." She paused. "I'm the other person from my firm. I resigned rather than fight it. I've regretted that ever since." I asked her if she'd be willing to put any of this in writing. She said yes. Victoria called me that evening. "This is very helpful," she said. "It establishes a pattern that significantly weakens any claim that your husband was acting in good faith. I want you to file for divorce, and I want you to do it before he does anything to complicate the asset picture." I filed that week. The weeks that followed were the kind of hard that doesn't announce itself. It was quiet and gray and full of logistics. I moved from Reese's to a furnished studio in the same neighborhood, a 1-bedroom above a dry cleaner with windows that faced a courtyard. It was small and impersonal, and mine in a way our house had never really felt. My mother-in-law called 4 times. My husband's older brother, the responsible one, called twice to explain that I was making a mistake and that family handled things privately. My husband's friends, people I'd known for years, people who had sat at my dinner table, sent messages asking me to reconsider, to think about what I was doing. My own mother called to say she thought I should try counseling first, that marriage was supposed to be hard, that I needed to make sure I wasn't overreacting. I hung up and didn't call her back for 2 weeks. The company investigation concluded 6 weeks after it began. My husband resigned rather than face termination for cause. The findings documented unauthorized facilitation of third-party transactions using employee accounts, misuse of his position in the finance department to access account information he had no approved reason to view, and a prior incident at his previous employer that had been flagged but never formally resolved. The company's legal team referred certain findings to Oregon's Department of Consumer and Business Services. Victoria and I spent 4 months preparing for the divorce proceeding. Discovery was exhaustive. My husband's attorney fought hard on the asset division, arguing that his parents' co-signature on the mortgage entitled them to a share of the equity and that my husband's career disruption was my fault. Victoria's response was methodical. She presented the documented consulting payments that had been redirected and the account records showing where they'd gone. She presented the credit card opened in my name, the application showing his handwriting, the charges traced to purchases I had never made. She presented the testimony from his former colleague in Seattle. She presented the company investigation report. She also presented something I had spent a long sleepless night assembling, a timeline of every professional opportunity I had declined or deferred over the 4 years of our marriage. The Chicago conference, a lateral move to a more visible role that I'd turned down after my husband said it would mean longer hours and we needed to prioritize our home life. A mentorship program I dropped out of halfway through because he'd started making comments about how I was never present anymore. Victoria called it a pattern of professional isolation. The judge, a measured man in his late 50s who gave nothing away during proceedings, listened to all of it. He awarded me the house. My mother-in-law's co-signature claim was dismissed because the co-signature was a liability arrangement, not an ownership stake. He ordered my husband to repay the full amount of the fraudulent credit card charges. He awarded me compensatory damages for professional losses with a specific calculation based on the consulting income that had been redirected without my consent. The number was $68,000. My husband sat at his table with his jaw tight and his eyes forward. He'd worn a charcoal blazer to every proceeding, neat and composed, the same man who had stood in our kitchen that Tuesday morning asking about invoices. I felt something, watching him. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more like the particular relief of a long-held breath finally released. I don't remember much of walking out of the courthouse. I remember the cold. It was February, Portland gray, damp in the specific way that gets into your coat, and Reese standing on the steps with her hands in her pockets. "So," she said. "Done," I said. She hugged me for a long time, long enough that I stopped counting. I moved back into the house in March. It felt different immediately, in ways I hadn't expected. Quieter, obviously, but also larger. I rearranged the living room furniture the first weekend because I had never liked how he'd positioned the couch, and the realization that I could just move it, that I didn't need to negotiate or justify or wait for a moment when the mood was right, made me stand in the middle of the room for a full minute. I bought a plant, something leafy and dramatic for the kitchen windowsill. He had always said he didn't want plants because they attracted bugs. Work became the place where the recovery was most visible, because that's where the evidence accumulated. I stopped apologizing before I started sentences. I started defending my timeline estimates instead of immediately softening them. My team noticed before I did. One of my junior managers, a methodical and observant woman I'd been developing for 2 years, stopped me in the hallway in April and said, "You seem different lately. I don't know how to describe it. More like yourself." I told her I was fine. She gave me a look that said she understood more than I'd said. In June, Claudette called me into her office again. This time, the door stayed open. Richard, our CEO, was there, and 2 members of the executive team. "We're restructuring the program management function," Claudette said. We're creating a director-level position. Director of Project Operations. We want you in it. I looked at her. You're serious? Richard leaned forward slightly. The Portland office has the highest project delivery rate in the company this year. Your team's client retention numbers are exceptional. You've been operating at director level for 2 years. The title just hasn't caught up to the reality. He paused. There's no one whispering in anyone's ear that you can't handle it. This is straight performance data. The promotion came with a 35% salary increase, equity participation, and a seat on the Regional Leadership Council. The same council where decisions about my team's budget and structure had been made, sometimes in rooms I hadn't been invited into. I said yes. That fall, I presented at the conference in Chicago I passed on 4 years earlier. I gave a session on cross-functional project recovery strategies and received more questions during the Q&A than the room had time for. I scheduled lunch with 3 attendees afterward and flew home on a Sunday evening tired and satisfied in the specific way that only comes from doing something real. In November, I met someone at a professional development workshop in Seattle. He was a quiet, unhurried man who managed operations at a nonprofit focused on housing infrastructure. We talked for 2 hours after the event ended, standing in a parking garage because neither of us had thought to move somewhere warmer. He asked thoughtful questions and didn't fill silences with noise. He laughed at the right moments and didn't once make me feel like my professional life was a problem to be managed. We had dinner the following week when he was in Portland for a meeting. Then again the week after. I told him about my husband and the divorce on our 4th dinner at a small Italian place on Mississippi Avenue, over pasta I barely touched because I was nervous. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "That sounds like it was exhausting to live through, and brave to get out of." Not "I'm sorry," which would have made me feel fragile. Not "I can't believe he did that," which would have made me feel like a cautionary tale. Just acknowledgement and recognition. It was both of those things, I said. He reached across and covered my hand with his. For what it's worth, the woman sitting here right now doesn't seem like someone who needs to be managed. By spring, I was spending most weekends with him, in Portland or Seattle, depending on our schedules. He cooked dinner without any production around it, and asked about my projects with genuine curiosity, and never once suggested I might be overextending myself professionally. When I got the Chicago conference invitation for a 2nd year and told him I'd been asked to keynote, he said, "That's incredible," and meant it. Simple as that. I ran into my husband on a Saturday afternoon in April. I was at the farmer's market on the waterfront, the one I'd stopped going to without quite noticing, and he was coming out of a coffee shop with a woman I didn't recognize. He looked older, a little reduced somehow, not badly, just ordinary in the way that happens when the particular armor a person wears stops fitting. He saw me and stopped. We stood there for a moment, 2 people from a life that was now technically history. "How are you doing?" he asked. He meant it, I think. "Good," I said. "Really good." "I heard about the promotion." "Yeah." He nodded once, slowly. Something crossed his face that I couldn't fully read. Not quite regret, not quite acceptance. Something in between, still unresolved. "I'm glad," he said. "I mean that." I believed him. I also knew that believing him changed nothing about any of it. I said take care and kept walking. On the drive home, the radio played something I'd had on a playlist years ago, and then stopped listening to because he'd said it was too melancholy for morning drives. I turned it up. The house smelled like the coffee I'd left brewing, and the plant on the kitchen windowsill that had grown dramatically since March. I set my bag down, poured a cup, stood at the window. Outside, Portland was doing what it does in April. Uncertain light, pale green pushing through everything, the particular smell of damp bark and something almost floral. I had a meeting Monday morning to prep for, a client briefing to review, a call with my director of operations counterpart in Seattle to schedule. A full, complicated, demanding life waiting on the other side of the weekend. I used to stand at windows like this, feeling like I was fading, taking up less and less space until the outline of who I was started to blur. I thought that was just what marriage did to people. I thought accommodation was the same thing as love. It isn't. The car, the account, the missing payments, the sideways comments to the people who held my future in their hands, none of it was about money or convenience or family loyalty. It was about keeping me small enough to manage, and the moment I stopped being manageable, I got everything back. My name, my account, my house, my career, and most importantly, myself. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. We share real stories about real people finding their way back to themselves. And in the comments, I want to know, what was the moment you finally realized the relationship wasn't what you thought it was? Drop it below. I read every single one. I keep coming back to the moment Claudette set her pen down. Not dramatically, just quietly, deliberately. The way you put something down when you've decided you're done pretending not to see what's right in front of you. That small gesture cracked something open in me that I hadn't been able to crack open myself in 4 years. What I've learned, living on the other side of all of it, is that the people who take from us rarely announce themselves. They don't show up demanding. They show up helpful. Generous even. My husband was charming when we met. Attentive. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt before. And then, so gradually I didn't notice it happening, the attention shifted from lifting me up to keeping me level. And then, eventually, to keeping me just a little bit lower than where I was trying to go. The credit card. The redirected payments. The quiet word to my former manager. None of it was accidental. That's what I had to reckon with. Not that he made mistakes, but that he made choices. Integrity isn't something you have until you're tested. I didn't fully understand that until I was sitting across from Claudette, being asked to account for money I hadn't spent. And I had a choice between protecting the lie I'd been living in or telling the truth and burning the whole structure down. What I know now is that the moment I told the truth, not strategically, not because I'd calculated the outcome, but because I was simply too tired to keep swallowing it, everything else followed from that. The investigation, the divorce, the judgment, the promotion, the plant on the windowsill, all of it traced back to one decision made in a glass-walled conference room on an ordinary Wednesday. There's something I wish someone had told me earlier. Being smart is not the same as seeing clearly. I'm good at my job. I've always been good at solving complex problems, tracing systems, finding where the breakdown occurs, but I applied none of that intelligence to my own life for 4 years because I didn't want to find what I was afraid was there. Wisdom isn't just knowing things. It's having the honesty to look at what's actually in front of you, even when looking is frightening. Vanessa, the woman who reached out to me from Seattle, was smarter in that way than I'd been. She'd seen the pattern, and she'd named it. I'm grateful she found me. And then there's the part that nobody really prepares you for, which is what it actually costs to rebuild. Not financially, though that was real, but personally. The friends who went quiet, the family members who asked me to reconsider, the weeks in Reese's spare bedroom wondering if I was overreacting to my own life. Perseverance, real perseverance, isn't dramatic. It's showing up to the deposition after a sleepless night. It's rearranging the furniture in your own living room and standing there for a full minute realizing you're allowed to. It's flying to Chicago alone and presenting to a room full of strangers and discovering that the version of yourself you were afraid you'd lost was there the whole time, just waiting for the noise to stop. I don't believe things happen for a reason in any tidy sense. But I do believe that what we choose to do with what happens to us shapes who we become. Claudette saw something in me worth protecting before I could see it in myself. Reese held space for me without asking me to be anything other than a mess. Victoria fought with precision and calm. The people who showed up for me were people of character. And I think I earned them by finally deciding to be one myself. The house is mine now, so is everything else.